I never thought a single night could change everything. One evening, I returned home to find my life shattered in ways I couldn't have imagined. My closest friends had turned their backs, my trust shattered, and a message appeared on my phone that made my blood run cold. If you don't do exactly as we say, there will be consequences. The walls that once felt safe now seemed like a cage, and I realized that the people I loved the most had secretly conspired against me. Everything I had built, everything I had believed in, was hanging by a thread. Where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments. It began with small signs, almost invisible at first. Messages ignored, invitations silently cancelled, and whispers that seemed too coincidental to dismiss. I told myself it was nothing, just life, I thought, but deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. Then came the night when the truth became impossible to ignore. The betrayal wasn't accidental, it was calculated. As I sifted through the fragments of my shattered trust, I realized that the people closest to me had been orchestrating a quiet sabotage. Every smile, every handshake, every word of encouragement had been a mask hiding a hidden agenda. I remember standing in my room, the weight of anger, hurt, and disbelief pressing on my chest, as the phone lit up again with another chilling message. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war, and I had no intention of surrendering. That night, I swore silently to myself that I would reclaim everything they had tried to take from me, not with words or confrontation, but with a patience so precise it would become their undoing. Every small detail I had overlooked, every action I had dismissed as coincidence, now became a piece of a larger puzzle I was determined to solve. The first step was understanding the full scope of their deception, mapping every lie, every betrayal, and every secret. The next morning, the world seemed unchanged, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. I walked through familiar streets, met familiar faces, yet everything felt different. Every glance, every word, every gesture felt like it carried a hidden meaning, a coded message only I seemed to understand. I began to notice patterns I had ignored before, the timing of certain events, the subtle reactions when I mentioned particular topics, the way some people's smiles never reached their eyes. Each piece of evidence became a thread, and I was determined to weave them into a map that would guide my next move. I spent hours retracing past conversations, replaying memories, and examining every detail that had once seemed trivial. There was a careful choreography to their betrayal, and I refused to let it go unnoticed. At the same time, the quiet anger inside me began to shift. It was no longer just a burning desire to expose them, it became a discipline, a focus. I started keeping a record of every interaction, noting behaviors, and gathering proof of deceit. Friends who had seemed loyal were now pawns in a game I hadn't yet revealed, and the people I trusted most were now targets, not for confrontation, but for a silent reckoning. I realized that patience was my weapon. Impulsive reactions could ruin everything. I had to become invisible in their eyes, a ghost moving through their carefully constructed lies, collecting fragments that would later assemble into an unassailable fortress of truth. I also felt the weight of isolation. The loneliness was suffocating at times, but it sharpened my senses, honed my mind. Each night, I would lie awake thinking of the precise steps I needed to take, analyzing their motives, their weaknesses, and the opportunities they unwittingly presented. Every action I planned was calculated, silent, and deliberate. I understood something crucial. Revenge wasn't about chaos or spectacle, it was about control. I would reclaim what was mine without them realizing it until the moment of revelation. The satisfaction would be in their quiet realization, the exact moment when they comprehended that the person they had underestimated was no longer vulnerable. By the end of that week, I had pieced together enough to see the larger picture. Their network of lies, their manipulations, their betrayals, all became clear. And in that clarity, I found a strange calm. The anger that had once consumed me transformed into a quiet determination. I knew the path ahead would be treacherous, demanding patience, cunning, and endurance. But I also understood that I was no longer the person they could break. Each day, each observation, each secret I uncovered was a brick in the foundation of my silent revenge, a foundation that, once complete, would leave them powerless in the wake of my quiet, inevitable triumph. Move, until I could see the entire pattern laid bare, and as I began, I realized that revenge wasn't just about retaliation, it was about reclaiming my peace, my strength, and my dignity, silently, meticulously, until the world that had betrayed me was the same world that would witness my quiet triumph. Weeks passed, and with each day, my plan took form. I moved like a shadow in the lives of those who had betrayed me, unnoticed, invisible, yet fully aware of every move they made. Every conversation I overheard, every glance exchanged, every whispered lie became a weapon in my arsenal. I learned their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities. I catalogued every weakness, not for immediate confrontation, but for the perfect moment when their own miscalculations would become their downfall. I watched them celebrate small victories, completely unaware that each one tightened the trap I was setting around them. It was during these days that I discovered the subtle power of silence. By refusing to react, by letting them underestimate me, I gained an advantage they could never anticipate. I learned to mask my intentions behind smiles, polite nods, and casual interactions. I became a ghost in their reality, observing, absorbing, waiting. The thrill of control was intoxicating, knowing that every secret they believed safe was being recorded, every manipulation noted, every betrayal logged for the perfect unveiling. They were so confident in their power that they didn't see mine quietly growing in the shadows. The internal conflict remained, of course. There were nights when doubt crept in, when I questioned the cost of revenge, the weight of the solitude I had embraced. But every recollection of betrayal, every memory of humiliation and pain, reminded me why I had begun this journey. It wasn't about rage, it was about reclamation. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above their deception, that I could outmaneuver them not with noise and confrontation, but with patience, precision, and unwavering resolve. Small victories began to emerge, though almost imperceptibly. A carefully placed piece of information led to mild confusion, an unintentional error on their part, a subtle shift in their confidence. These moments, though minor, were the first glimpses of the silent avalanche I was building. I could see the pattern forming, the threads of chaos I had quietly sown were starting to tug at the edges of their reality. And each time, I reminded myself that this was only the beginning. The ultimate reckoning would not be dramatic, it would be inevitable. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed a change within myself. The fear that had once gnawed at my confidence had been replaced by a calm clarity. I no longer reacted emotionally, I acted strategically. I realized that the power of silent revenge was not just in undermining them, it was in transforming myself. Each calculated move, each quiet observation, each patient step forward strengthened my resolve, reshaped my identity, and sharpened my perception of the world. By watching their every move, I learned not only about them but about myself. I began to anticipate their actions with a clarity that startled me. Their arrogance, their overconfidence, their careless attention to detail, they were all elements of my plan, woven together into a tapestry of silent victory. And the more I observed, the more I understood. Revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about transformation. I was no longer the person they had thought I was, vulnerable and easily manipulated. I was evolving, quietly and inexorably, into someone unbreakable, someone who would emerge from this storm not as a victim, but as a master of my own destiny. The turning point arrived quietly, so quietly that even I didn't realize, at first, how deeply the balance had shifted. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the world moves lazily, unaware that a silent war is unfolding. I was sitting alone, reviewing everything I had gathered. The messages, the hidden connections, the subtle manipulations that stretched back farther than I ever imagined. And then, like a puzzle suddenly snapping into place, the final revelation emerged. Their motives, their fears, their alliances, everything became clear. I saw the entire architecture of their betrayal, and more importantly, I saw the cracks. The instability they had built their confidence on was breathtakingly fragile. I understood then that revenge wouldn't require a grand strike, it would require a single, perfectly timed moment of silence. From that day onward, my actions grew sharper, more intentional. I didn't need to confront them. Instead, I introduced small distortions into their world, barely noticeable shifts that made them doubt themselves, then each other. A misplaced document here, a redirected message there, a subtle change in timing. Everything I did was rooted in what they had already created. I merely nudged their lies so they would collapse under their own weight. The beauty of silent revenge was in its invisibility. They felt the consequences without ever seeing the hand guiding them. Every step I took was a mirror held up to their actions, reflecting the reality they had tried so desperately to hide. But with each move, the emotional toll deepened. At night, I found myself standing by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. There were moments when the weight of solitude pressed against my chest, when I wondered whether this path was transforming me into someone I didn't recognize. Yet each time, the memories resurfaced, the betrayal, the manipulation, the night everything broke. Those memories were both my burden and my compass, guiding me forward with a clarity that felt almost painful. I wasn't becoming heartless, I was becoming resilient. Each quiet decision was a reminder that healing sometimes requires distance, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to self-preservation. Over time, their world began to unravel. The alliances they had taken for granted trembled under the pressure of their own lies. Suspicion emerged among them like a silent infection, spreading slowly, invisibly, until they started questioning even their closest confidants. I watched from the shadows as they scrambled to find answers, unaware that the truth was slipping through their fingers like sand. And still, I remained silent. No accusations, no confrontations, no outward signs of retaliation. Just calculated stillness. It was the kind of quiet that unnerved even the strongest minds. Yet even as the cracks deepened, I remained cautious. Revenge was never a sprint, it was a slow, precise walk through uncertain terrain. One misstep could expose everything, undoing the months of discipline I had built. So I reinforced my strategy, strengthened my boundaries, and prepared for the inevitable moment when their entire foundation would crumble. I knew it was coming, every sign pointed to it, but I had learned patience. My strength was not in striking first but in waiting until their own actions delivered my justice. And slowly, beautifully, silently, that moment began to draw near. The unraveling of their world didn't happen with explosions or chaos. It unfolded with the slow, inevitable cracking of something already fragile. I watched as their confidence flickered, as their certainty about their own stories weakened with each passing day. They began to move differently, more guarded, more anxious, more desperate. Their whispers grew sharper, their glances more suspicious, and the lies they once told so effortlessly now tangled around them like thorns. It was remarkable how quickly a person's identity crumbles when the foundation beneath them begins to shift. I didn't need to lift a hand, I simply let their own actions echo back at them, amplified by the silence I maintained so carefully. But this stage of revenge brought its own challenges. The closer I got to my goal, the more intense the emotional strain became. There were nights when sleep refused to come, nights when memories of their betrayal replayed like a storm behind my eyes. I would sit alone in the dark, my breath steady, reminding myself of the purpose behind every quiet step I took. Doubt tried to creep in at times, whispering that I was losing myself to the very darkness I had sworn to overcome. But I didn't allow it to take root. I had learned too much, grown too much, endured too much to turn back now. Silent revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about reclaiming my place in a world they tried to push me out of. Their mistakes became more frequent, a message sent to the wrong person. A lie contradicted by an old conversation, a forgotten detail resurfacing at the worst possible time. Each misstep widened the cracks, and I guided those cracks gently, strategically, ensuring they spread exactly where they needed to. I became the architect of their collapse, yet I left no fingerprints behind. They searched for an enemy, someone to blame, but revenge delivered in silence leaves no shadows to chase. Their confusion became their torment, and their torment was the slow justice I had been building toward. Still, I kept my distance, emotionally and physically. I didn't let myself celebrate their downfall prematurely. Revenge demanded restraint, it demanded clarity. I continued observing them from afar, watching their alliances fracture, their trust disintegrate, their plans dissolve into panic. They had always believed they were in control, always assumed I was too weak to fight back. But power is not always loud. Sometimes the strongest strike is the one delivered without a sound. And now, they were beginning to feel it, even if they couldn't explain it. One evening, I witnessed the subtle shift that told me the climax was near. A conversation filled not with gossip or manipulation, but with fear. Real fear, the kind that roots itself in uncertainty and grows in silence. They were finally beginning to understand that something was happening, something quiet, calculated, and unstoppable. And although they couldn't see me, couldn't trace anything back to me, they could feel the consequences closing in. It was in their nervous glances, their trembling hands, their strained voices. They had spent months pulling strings, weaving lies, building traps. But now, the threads were snapping one by one, and the traps were collapsing under their own weight. They could sense the ending approaching, but they had no idea when it would strike, or how. And I remained silent, watching with the calm patience of someone who has already accepted the outcome long before it arrives. Their world was about to break. And this time, I wouldn't need to take a single step. Their own deception would deliver the final blow. The collapse began on a day that looked deceptively ordinary. The sun was out, people moved through their routines with the same predictable rhythm, and the world appeared calm, almost peaceful. But beneath that surface, pressure had been building for weeks, and now it finally reached its breaking point. It started with a single revelation, small, almost insignificant on its own, but once exposed, it tore through their carefully constructed lies like a spark igniting dry leaves. One truth led to another, each unraveling another layer of deceit, until the chain reaction became unstoppable. I watched from a distance, unseen, as panic spread among them like a silent wave. They scrambled to control the narrative, to salvage their image, to protect themselves from the fallout of their own making. But it was too late. The world they had so confidently built upon lies was collapsing, piece by piece, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Their voices, once filled with arrogance and authority, now trembled with uncertainty. They accused each other, argued, deflected blame, but the more they tried to escape responsibility, the deeper they sank into the consequences they had created. It was almost poetic, watching them become victims of their own schemes. Their alliances shattered, their trust eroded completely, and their control slipped through their hands like sand. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. The silence I had maintained all this time now echoed louder than any confrontation ever could. It was in that silence that their guilt grew unbearable, that the weight of their actions finally caught up with them. Emotionally, the moment was heavier than I had imagined. I had thought that witnessing their downfall would bring a sense of triumph, a rush of satisfaction. But instead, I felt something deeper, something quieter. It was closure, not loud, not triumphant, but steady and profound. The anger that had once burned fiercely inside me softened into a calm understanding. I realized then that the point of revenge had never been to destroy them, it had been to free myself. And watching their world crumble wasn't about proving my strength to them, it was about proving it to myself. As the chaos around them intensified, I stepped further back, letting the consequences unfold naturally. They tried desperately to find answers, to identify the source of the collapse, but their search led them nowhere. They were trapped in the very maze they had built for me. The lies they once used to manipulate had become chains binding them to each other's downfall. They had finally reached the point of no return, the moment when their actions collided with reality so violently that the shock alone left them gasping for stability. But stability was no longer theirs to claim. The final break came unexpectedly. A confrontation between two of the closest conspirators, one that erupted not because of anything I had done, but because of everything they had done to themselves. Accusations flew, secrets spilled, and the truths they had hidden for so long emerged with a force that shattered whatever remained of their unity. It was the kind of moment that didn't need witnesses, the kind that echoed in every direction, leaving everyone involved stunned by the aftermath. And in that moment, I knew, this was the end of their influence over my life. Their power dissolved completely, not through my interference, but through the consequences of their own choices. Standing at a distance, watching their fall unfold, I felt the final weight lift off my shoulders. The storm I had walked through, the pain I had endured, the patience I had embraced, it all led to this quiet moment of freedom. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate, I simply breathed, feeling the calm of a future no longer chained to their betrayal. Revenge, delivered in silence, had done its work. And now, all that remained was the final chapter, one not written in anger, but in healing, reflection, and unshakable strength. In the quiet aftermath, everything felt different. The weight of betrayal, the tension of anticipation, and the relentless pressure of planning, it had all dissolved into stillness. I walked through the spaces they once controlled, no longer shadowed by fear, no longer haunted by manipulation. The silence around me wasn't empty, it was full of clarity, strength, and a sense of hard-earned peace. I realized that the true victory wasn't in watching them stumble or crumble, it was in reclaiming myself, in emerging whole and unbroken from the storm they had created. Every memory of hurt now served as a reminder of resilience, every scar as evidence of the strength I had cultivated in solitude. I looked back once, not with anger, but with understanding. They had shaped my journey, unknowingly crafting the path I needed to become stronger, wiser, and more certain of my worth. The silent revenge had been more than just a lesson for them, it had been a transformation for me. I had learned that true power lies not in aggression or spectacle, but in patience, in strategy, in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own integrity can never be broken. And in that moment of reflection, I felt free. Free from fear, free from manipulation, free from the past. And now, as I stand in this calm, I can't help but wonder, where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments. This is my story, my journey, and the proof that even in silence, justice can be delivered with precision. It's a reminder that no matter how deep the betrayal, resilience and patience can carve a path toward liberation. For those who have faced deception, heartbreak, or betrayal, remember this: your strength isn't measured by the chaos around you, but by the calm you carry within. And in that calm, you find your true victory. Thank you for following this journey. For more stories of courage, strategy, and transformation, subscribe to Revenge Book. Because sometimes, the quietest steps leave the most powerful footprints.